Welcome back, tankers. It's Medesic, and we're going to get back to modding skins on your HD tanks and World Tanks. Carrying on from the previous video, in this second video, I'll be showing you some of the basics of Paint.net, some tips and tricks to hopefully, for those who are less experienced image editors and want to know a bit more about this program, and then we'll carry on to look at the different maps that are actually that make up the skin of the tank, and what each one does, and maybe how you can possibly modify each one to change the appearance of the tank in the game, that to an extent that you might like. You can use the trickery of each skin, but we'll get to that. So first, let's roll with some Paint.net. Now, Paint.net we went over a bit in the previous video, but I'm going to show you some of the basics, so that if you were watching me, mess with Paint.net and you had no idea how to use it and you're kind of unclear, and so I'm going to be going over some of that. So to start off, of course, let's run by layers again. If you didn't see layers in the previous video, here they are. This is bottom right. You can add a new layer, and layers are basically what they say they are. They're pretty self-explanatory. So you can create a layer, and you can draw on each individual layer. Each layer holds its own content, and then you go from layer to layer. You can turn layers off if you want to just look at a certain part of the picture, and you can have different modifications on each layer, such as if you want a line, a stripe across the tank, and then just turn the layer off if you don't want that stripe anymore, if you want to see what the tank looks like without the stripe, if you have content on another layer. So layers are just a great way of organizing your work and keeping everything kind of nice and neat, so that if you want to back up to something, then you don't have to worry about, oh no, I have to pull this file again. And so layers are just kind of convenient, kind of a convenient aspect. We'll go ahead and make a new layer so that we can make some modifications without worrying about it. Another thing I want to show you is the primary secondary color. Now, this is kind of a typical feature of the regular MS Paint. I'm pretty sure some of you are familiar with it. Now, of course, we have the pencil and the brush tool, kind of like Paint again. Pencil being just your typical pixel pushing tool. Of course, we're not going to be using the pencil tool very much. We're going to be using the brush tool. Now, the brush, as you saw in the previous video, we can change the brush size. So we can have a thick brush, we can have a smaller brush, and so you can brush at different widths. And then the hardness meter helps the soft edge, which really only takes place on the higher brush width. And another thing you can do is minimize the hardness, and then there's an aspect down here called opacity alpha. Now, all these other attributes simply affect the color. So you have the RGB, which you can make it red, you can make it green, and then there's the Hue and saturation, and I forget what the one's called. Just on the top of my head. Anyways, alpha is the opacity, so just the transparency of the color that you are painting. So if you change it to like midway, then it's very light, so you can use it to darken the tank. If you want to use the brush tool on a high width, you can chunk it down, or you can lightly brush some parts, or you can zoom in using the zoom tool, wherever that is. I forgot it's right there. Oh, Jesus. Right click to zoom out. So you can just lightly brush the edges, make it darker around the edges. Anything that you want to try. The brush tool, those are all the features of the brush tool. I mean, we can go into a bit more, but those are the absolute basic. That's all you really need to know. The secondary color is, of course, what you have on your right click. So if you hold the right clicker down and then paint, then that's your secondary color. It'll paint your secondary color. And again, what you can do is you can have your secondary color also be black, and then have it be transparent slightly. So you can have a thick black and then a transparent black on your other clicker. So if we go back to the top of the history, again, we can go over history again if you guys want. So history up here is basically just keeps track of all your steps. So you can just click a bunch of times, make a bunch of steps, and then go back. Click on a step, and then it reverses all the way back to that step. And then be careful, because if you go back to a step and then edit from that step, it deletes all of the previous steps. But this is a great way to backtrack or erase something if you don't want it anymore, if you made a mistake. Alright, so let's zoom out. And then I'll show you gradients. Gradients are probably something that you'll use as well. Gradients, essentially, you use the primary and secondary tool to go between on the gradient. So when you click and drag with the gradient tool, like so, you create a gradient. It just creates a gradient image for you, and it spans between two colors from black to white, and it's a gradient that goes between those two. in a gradual manner. So if you want to make the secondary color blue, then it goes from a black to blue, and so on and so forth. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm pretty sure you guys all get it by now. And another cool thing you can do is when you make one of the colors slightly opaque, of course, the gradient shows as a solid white, but then it graduates and leaves all the content behind it. Of course, if we make a new layer, you can have a gradient on, and then you can get rid of the layer if you don't want the gradient anymore. So that's a cool thing, a cool little trick you can do with gradients in Paint.net that you definitely cannot do in regular Paint, as far as I know. I haven't played with the regular Paint that much recently, and I know Windows 10's Paint is probably quite a bit different. Anyways, so we go back to what was I going to move on to? Sorry. Oh, Select Tool. So the Select Tool is a very interesting tool that you can use, and this is used a lot in Photoshop. Photoshop users will know this. So basically, with the we'll delete this layer. With a Select Tool, you select a region, and you can move it about just like you can. If you have it in a layer that already has content, if you select a region and then move it about, it obviously picks up that part of the picture and then moves it so you can move it to somewhere else and clone it. Control X, Control V to paste, Control C, V to copy it, so you can have two copies of the same area. And then another thing we can do with the Select tool is use it to limit where we draw. So you click and drag, so you select a region, and then go to the Brush tool, and then leave that region selected. And then we can paint, but if we try and move the cursor outside of the select region, it won't paint in that region. It only paints inside the selected region. So if we go with a really high brush thickness, we can paint along here, and then it keeps a rigid edge along the edge of the selected area of the selection region. And then if we get rid of the region, we get rid of the selection region, and then you can see that quite clearly we've made a nice we've made a square, made a very firm square, so we can go along an edge. So that way you don't have to worry about going to the brush tool and then eking it along an edge very carefully and putting a lot of time into that. You can keep you can make a firm selection of a region and then just simply paint that. And you can do that with a lasso tool as well. So you can simply draw a region like this, and then you can brush that region and then fill that region completely if you want, and then boom, there you go. So that's a great way to paint defined regions without worrying so much about going outside of a region. Or so let's say if you want to only paint the side of the hull. So as you can see very clearly in the UV that the side of the hull is right here. So we can go to the lasso tool. Unfortunately, the other side of the hull is right here, so we have to include that as well. So we're going to draw on the lasso tool very carefully, if we can, around the hull. And let's say we want to darken the teager, so we can make it like a shadow teager or something like that. Okay, and this is a really hacky job. You guys are obviously going to want to do a better job of dragging and clicking around, but this is just me messing around here. Okay, obviously we don't want it like flat black, so well, maybe you do want it flat black, but I'm just going to make it like a light black. So here is my darkened teager. Boom. And then say I wanted a stripe down the side of the hull, down up here on the casemate. So I'd click and drag, and then go to the brush tool, and I'll make it a bright red. And then Control D is a keyboard shortcut to get rid of the selection region, and there we go. There it is. And again, a lot of this is going to be trial and error, so you're going to want to go between the game and the actual you modifying the document constantly while you're doing this. So let's go ahead and save the albedo map, okay, as a DDS, and then hull 01 AM, replace, yes. And yeah, just default settings, flatten. Flatten, if you have layers, it'll ask you to flatten. Flattening it just basically means it'll flatten the whole image. Flatten will show up in the history, so if you still want to preserve your layers, just Control Z after saving. Don't worry about it too much. Just Control Z right after you save, and then it will go back to having the layers, so you don't have to. So you can just eliminate your modifying layer, and then you'll have the original map, just in case you want to start from scratch. So don't worry about that. But if we go to the game now, if I'll pull up OBS and then go to the game, so we have my skinned bulldog here, but we need to go to the Teager and take a look and see if that is skinned. Yep, there we go. There's my stripe. There's the darkened whole sides. It's kind of difficult to tell along with the rest of the tank, but there's the stripe right there. So we've skinned a stripe right on the side of the Teager, which is what we wanted, and that's perfect. Looks good. Unfortunately, as you can see here, some of the stripe has made it onto another part of the UV, and that's one of the things you're going to want to watch out for is messing with certain parts of the UV map. So let's see if we can discover exactly where we did. Okay, right there probably. See, that's actually it could be right here. Yeah, it's right here. Sorry, oh wait, sorry. I have to go to this. So as we can see here, yeah, so if you look here, that little part of the UV has the the tow hook mount right there, part of the hull, and our stripe goes into that. So that's what you want to be careful. You want to watch out for that when you're messing with the UV map here, is going into other parts or other components, because if you like scribble on all these little components here, so I just chose the pencil tool, but sorry, we save that. So those are just random components that you might not know exactly where they go. I mean, and if you're looking for an individual component that you want to paint, sometimes you may have to go and find it and just trial and error, just scribble on it and then see, save, and then just reload it in tanks and then see if it refreshes, because I mean, there's no without having the model UVs and everything pumped into an actual 3D CAD program like you're supposed to, you just have to basically work with the software you've got, and this is the best you can do. So as you can see, we've scribbled over the drivers, periscopes up here on top. I think this is, no, that can't be the commander's hatch. That's probably one of the loader's hatches. I could be mistaken, but anyway, we scribbled over certain components that we probably didn't want to. So that's one thing you got to be careful for when you are working with the UVs. But anyways, yeah, that's some of the basics of Paint.net, and hopefully that will give you a really good idea of how to kick off skinning tanks, or just image editing in general. I mean, if you want to use Paint.net for any of your usual works, like a logo for something that you make, if you want to draw a logo with a lasso tool and then color it in, so I don't know, whatever you want. Paint.net is a very powerful program for being free, so feel free to mess with it and just figure things out for yourself. I mean, it's a pretty neat program. So, okay, since this is a very good amount of content here already, I know it's relatively short for the tutorial video, but I'm going to go ahead and stop this video here, and then next video we're going to cover actually skinning the tank and messing with the different skin maps. So we were only messing with the albedo map, I believe is what it's called, and that's just the flat color map. We can mess with the other maps, which actually do change the appearance of the tank in-game and actually make a huge difference to some extent. And I'm pretty sure it's something that you guys want to mess with anyways, so I mean, if you feel like it, you can end it here. This is plenty of information for you to carry off of and start modding skins already, but I mean, if you're interested and you want to move on to these other skin maps, feel free. So I will hopefully see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.